Hey guys, it's Juno here. Today I want to talk to you about three different things. So what are these three things? These three things are things that I think serve very little useful purpose in our lives. However, they have come to dominate in the modern generation a lot of our interactions, our activities, and a lot of the time that we actually spend unproductively, which could be done otherwise. So the three things that I've come to think about here are computer games, pornography, and energy drinks. So normally I would kind of categorize these as Master Chief, Riley Reid, and Red Bull. And you could sort of extrapolate that into kind of where a lot of your male energy, if you want to call it that, a lot of your productivity as a man, because you are somewhat genetically predisposed to do action, to do things in the real world, and how it's been redirected to be essentially inert. So it's stealing you of your ability to do things. So why do I come to this conclusion? Well, firstly, let me set out somewhat of a description of how this operates. So, it doesn't take a genius to realize that when you look at computer games, really what you're looking at is just a set of digital challenges that somebody has programmed for you to accomplish. And you gain some level of satisfaction from the reactions in-game when you complete those challenges. Now, on the face of it, that doesn't necessarily sound like a terrible thing. However, what you have to realize is that the objective setting done in the virtual world produces essentially no objective good for you in the real world. In broad stroke, I usually would say that games serve a function in that they're able to refine a certain set of skills with minimum risk. And you could look at sports as being an exemplary version of that, where teams of men are cooperating and coordinating to achieve an objective, and that objective usually requires them to utilize the actions they would otherwise perform in the natural world. So if you want to say like a game of soccer, you could look at it as kind of like it's a simulation for hunting. You know, it's a group of men working in cooperation with very shorthand communication to idealize and project the objective of scoring a goal and not having a goal scored against them. And then in obtaining those objectives, they're training their abilities to function. One as individuals, so being healthy and adaptive as an individual, but also in their ability to cooperate effectively. Now, you can draw parallels to the level of productivity you would achieve in your occupation, right? Your job kind of aligns in a similar way. So you're required to work in a team to achieve some objectives, and there are certain elements of your character and the character of your colleagues that's going to be more or less likely to produce that effect. And that's kind of the job of the recruitment officers, is they're trying to assign these qualities to people and place them within the organization in an effective manner. Now, the issue with computer games is they really don't fulfill these criteria. What they do instead is they're presenting on... Normally, there will be some perhaps requirement for reflexes or reactions. And so they can give a very, very surface appearance of having the same benefit as other types of simulations like sports. However, in reality, the presence of computerized AI bots that serve as the characters you interact with, your team essentially, become so predictable and have a very limited scope of adaptability, that essentially you're able to game the system. And so your essential properties require no development, or very limited development, to succeed. Yet games go out of their way to entice you and encourage you with congratulatory messages and symbols and signals, lots of lights, lots of colors, sound, and then somehow rewarding you in-game. So that was how I would analyze the first element in that trifecta I described, and why how effective it really is. All right, so the second part would be obviously pornography. Now, pornography is, I think, less subversive, okay, because it's actually quite easy, even for the last generation, to see how damaging computer games are. Or damaging is a very strong interpretation of it, but at least not productive. Whereas pornography, to some degree, it ties into something a lot more base and instinctual, so it's a bit harder to identify the negativity inherent in it. But I would say that by commodifying sex and giving you essentially like a junk version of sex, like junk food isn't real food, it's not sustaining, it's not nutritious, it's just fulfilling a very basic desire. It's providing you with something that you innately want, but it's not providing it in its full context. It's only giving one element of it that makes you feel somewhat like it's been completed. And of course, this is quite obviously going to deteriorate someone's drive and someone's motivation. Just the general inertia of their life is being siphoned off. And there has been arguments made in the past towards things like, well, this is the feminist movement's culmination, is the commodification of sex, because, women don't want to be used as objects. So that needs to be taken out of the context of a relationship and separated, because the relationship can't be about commodification. However, what happens then is you see, like, some women realize the instinctual need and desire for that kind of a dynamic, and then they make a fortune off OnlyFans. Because what they do then is they profit off of the fact that dynamic can't be achieved in a relationship. So they just offer femininity as a product, and then they're able to, heavily milk that as a commodity. And it's going to leave a lot of women in the lurch about what exactly is going wrong in their relationships. Why are men having these sorts of requirements from external sources? I think you'll already see it, right? Like, it'll be so atomized that women will just accept, a man can spend his money on whatever he wants, just like a woman can, and therefore it's none of my business if he's, giving money to a girl because she's super effeminate and showing him affection and attention, and also titillating him from an erotic standpoint. Because the women prior to that have been taught, don't objectify yourself, reduce your potential for titillation towards a male. Right? You don't want to be that for that guy. You want him to love you for other reasons other than his physical need for you. Like, let him offload his physical need onto another woman. It's kind of the unaccounted remainder of that equation. But nevertheless, you do see that, Belle Delphine came out a few months ago and said, she makes $1 million a month. $1 million a month. And, obviously the platform itself is making more money than that. So it's not productive, and actually it's distorting and corroding the natural formation of relationships and the form they should be taking, the format. And so without the payoff of a genuine, fulfilling relationship, what is there to strive for? What is there to make design for or desire? Ultimately, you'll just end up in the cycle of trash, where all you understand is trash sex, junk sex, which is pornography, essentially. And that will just develop onwards. It'll be further commodified. There'll be some... we make kind of light over the fact that women are so open now about, like, it's that, they have sex toys and they utilize technology for their biological desires. there's still some stigma around men doing that, but I don't see that lasting much longer. I think as long as that dynamic is still represented, it'll just extend to the point where it's quite common for men to have like fleshlights. It'll be just accepted, and then there'll be some way of interacting that with these other girls who are providing sex as a service, and it becomes like a digital prostitution. So in the fact that, again, this isn't really representing the natural formation of a relationship and the dynamic that should be there. What it is doing is it's distorting it, and it's providing an unnatural solution to that problem, which is ultimately unfulfilling and therefore destructive, because it's never going to culminate in what you actually want. It'll just keep you in the cycle of thinking you're getting what you want and pushing you into investing in it further because you know that you're not being fulfilled. And there's none of the true benefits coming out of it that you would have from a more of a, fine, say, dependent relationship if you want to, where two parties are dependent on each other for a number of different things. And it's somehow, in some ways, it's this desire to never be dependent and to always want your independence that allows commodification to take place. So the third thing I pointed out, it sounds flippant, but I believe there's something to it, this idea that in the way that we've changed junk sex, we could look at junk food, but to be honest, the prior definitions of junk food that we had, like fast food chains and stuff like that, I just don't think it applies to a lot of the more recent generations. I think if you're drinking, Red Bull, Monster, and G Fuel, that's actually doing something different to what having a Big Mac does to you. Okay, like I personally enjoy Red Bull a lot, but I realise that there's something a bit off about it. That it actually presents me with a different state of mind after I consume it. Like I am more energetic. I'm a bit more productive. Actually, I feel like I'm a bit more capable, and I understand on some level, like, it's a bit addictive. Though, I guess it's kind of cringe to say, like, G Fuel is addictive, right? They would love that as marketing. But I think there is something to it. I think there is something to, like, you feel a bit of withdrawal if I haven't had a Red Bull for a while, and I've been drinking a lot recently, in the example, I would feel like, I really like to go and get one, right? Like it's a kind of false reward. And I know actually most energy drinks are totally packed with sugar, or they're packed with completely artificial sweeteners. And there's just not a lot of healthy stuff in there for me. Yet it seems to be somewhat fulfilling my desire for consumption. And it's obviously affecting my mood and my general outlook. So I desire it. And I think that's what the common theme is behind all of these sort of wasting methods for individuals, like computer games, pornography, and energy drinks, is that it all is rooted in desire. Like, in the computer game, you desire affirmation, validation, congratulation. And so you portray yourself as being some kind of, like, a god, some kind of really specially gifted individual, because you're able to produce in this virtual world amazing feats that would never be normally possible. And so you identify with that, and it allows you to fantasize as that, but it's a totally artificial fantasy. And just like in the way that, every guy instinctually feels like he wants this really healthy, beautiful, sexy girl, and he wants to be wanted, and he wants female attention because it defines his ability to succeed and to procreate, and these are all very natural inclinations to have. When you're watching porn and you're seeing that these girls who are heavily made up but do appear to be very pretty, very sexy, and they're gesturing towards the camera in extremely seductive ways and enticing ways, that they desire you. I mean, because it is a sort of point of view normally, where you're replacing the actual cameraman or whatever. It's sort of, it's another abuse of your desire, and again, it's insincere. It's lying to you because these things aren't really happening. You're just able to utilize the imperfections in your biological systems where they don't recognize the difference. You consciously recognize the difference and you go, I know sex is different to porn. But your brain doesn't recognize the difference between seeing a pussy in real life or seeing it on the screen. It reacts the same way. In fact, it can begin to only judge the screen one as valid. And actually, when you're in like real life situations with females and it is going that direction, you're getting none of the cues that you would have got in porn. Like pornography would provide you with way more incentive and obviously a lot higher quality of health female, because they're super skinny, super sexy, big tits and everything else. Whereas the girls you're going to realistically achieve in real life are going to be much more next door, the girl next door kind of girls, and so it's going to have a corrupting influence on your expectations. But moreover, it's going to mean that you only find like certain levels of stimulation attractive and signatory of something going ahead and going forward. But most women actually are not going to act in this way. Like, they're not going to provide this level of interaction. They're not going to provide this level of like sexy talk and telling you what they want and making it really clear that that they're only interested in physical things and they're heavily desiring you. I mean, most women are not usually used to acting in this way. And actually, if you met a woman in real life who was used to acting in this way, I think you would be somewhat confused by the situation. You'd feel like that's not something you're familiar with in real life. Is she real or is this porn? And I've definitely found sometimes that relationships become addictive because they're essentially just simulating pornography for me. Like, I'm just trying to live out my pornographic addiction with a woman, and I think that's a lot of demand being placed on one person to act in this way all the time, because the girl on the screen can act in this way all the time. You can replay that video as many times as you want, and there's plenty of videos out there that have the same kind of mannerism. But asking a girl to, every time you fancy it, to act in this specific way is going to be extremely difficult and taxing on the individual, and that is actually producing more of a situation where they're being objectified and sex is being commodified, right? So I would say it's born out of a desire to avoid it, but it's actually producing it more, because it's producing more of a market for it, more of an expectation of it, and more of a desire for that kind of behavior. And when that behavior is identified as what's desired, more people will imitate it to therefore themselves be more desired. Okay, so I know I mixed and mashed up a little bit there, but to be honest, the third issue of like energy drinks, it's so self-explanatory. It doesn't need a lot of dwelling upon. There is more to read into it, and there's more that you could say, and you could find different interpretations of looking at it. But the truth is you yourself, most people know, like, there is unhealthy food, and it's most unhealthy food is actually taking advantage of your natural desire for wanting highly calorific sustenance, because you understand your body has pre-programmed itself to value highly higher calorific foodstuffs, because they're less likely to appear in the natural world, and also they're going to satiate your need for sustenance for longer, and so therefore they're going to assign a higher quality, and therefore, nature's way of assigning high quality is to make you want it, right? It's to give you positive feedback and reward when you encounter it, if it can perceive that it's doing a greater benefit for you. But what it doesn't understand is moderation. So it doesn't always understand, like, how am I supposed to assign reward when there's abundance? Because in the natural world, that's quite an unnatural state. Abundance doesn't really exist. You kind of have to fight for everything, and therefore it just assigns value given its kind of, I'm not going to say survival ability, but definitely within an enclosed system of scarcity. Therefore, it's going to assign value to it and reward it appropriately. Alright, so I've described to it why these three elements exist and how they're negative. Maybe I can speculate for a while then about, like, well, why are they here? Okay, if we know why they're bad, and you've described it and explained a little bit, why did they exist in the first place? And I would say that on the whole, this could be just market forces at work. I'm willing to accept that interpretation. I would also say there is some evidence to suspect that it's somewhat coordinated and it's being imposed intentionally, because it does allow like some level of system of control to be put in place. But I don't think I need to talk about that. I think you could just, in theory at least, identify it potentially as being, well, market forces have identified that these are desired goods, and therefore it's made provision for them to be produced, and it will develop on that production. And as they get further refined and further appealed to, you will get more people who... addiction is a strong word, but definitely abuse them. So that they don't self-regulate, and they're just total victims to the market, essentially. Because they know, the market knows that they want it, and it just gives an unlimited supply as long as they can continue to purchase, and therefore people without restraint are just going to purchase continually. So what can be done? Well, the issue with imposing restraints externally is that people really will only ever see the impingement on their freedoms. They won't, or it'll be a struggle to communicate to them the derived benefit from moderation or even abstention from these things. And I would also argue to some degree that there's maybe a good argument to not have immediate secession. So providing like an ability to wean off is probably a healthier thing. Because if you just try and go cold turkey, it's the same problem everywhere, right? Like you go to cold turkey and then you lose the willpower. The willpower is the hard thing to maintain, and then once your progress is broken, you then have no desire to continue it because you've given it a shot and it didn't work, and therefore you're just going to abandon it. So my recommendation would be one of incremental reduction. So showing people the benefit of reducing their intake of these goods and services, and finding somewhere a medium in which they can still have access to it, so their freedoms aren't impinged on, but they are fully aware of the ramifications involved, so that they're not entering into it blindly and just eating themselves to death, right? Getting a heart attack at 40 because they love burgers. It's the same problem. It needs to be presented in a similar way so people understand that they should be free, but we require them to make good decisions. And the diversity of decisions is important. Right? It's nothing to say that someone can just sit here and tell people how to be, and that's going to always result in the best outcome for them. That simply isn't the case. There's too much deviation in individuals, and also the implications of like forcing that on people is going to lead to a number of reactions. And so really the truth has to be is like, for people who know themselves, being honest with themselves has to be the first point, and then acting on that knowledge is, in the context of this information, is the best way to address it. Alright, well I think I'm done for this part. I know I'll be following on some more stuff because there is definitely more to say on the subject. However, I'm actually mostly hopeful for this. I think we're not at a point yet where it's totally irreversible, and that people are utterly dependent. But I think we all have realised, at least because of the last year, being 2020 and everyone being stuck inside, exactly how much was on offer and how much we could, if we wanted to, just bury ourselves in these elements, bury ourselves in these levels of distraction. And what we can do is we can escape them. Like, it's very feasible to escape them. And I think the people who do are already succeeding in what they want and achieving things for real rather than just the deceptive image of their achievement, like pretending or being fooled, being deceived into thinking you're achieving. And so, yeah. It's not easy though, right? Like, it just happens at this point of the game's come up. But I have to say, I've been doing the second part. I've been watching pornography since I was at least sort of 15, 16. And it definitely affects your state of mind. It does change the way you look at women, because it makes you view them almost always, at least myself, It makes you view them always in somewhat of a sexual. It makes you view them at least partially sexually. So, you can just see like a modestly dressed but attractive woman on TV, and that can immediately trigger some sort of response where you kind of think, well, I could go jack off right now. I kind of want to go watch some porn, right? And in a strange way, right, like this scene right now on the screen where this like shaved-headed woman is essentially inert and unresponsive in an ice bath, and she's being plugged into. I can see a point in the future where this is some sort of derived enjoyment from this, because it is somehow sexual. It is sexualized, but it's totally inhumane. It's, there's nothing interactive and human about this. It is just entirely transactional. And you're just working off pure stimulation, and there's nothing substantial about it. There's nothing in there. And that is not the way people should be able to view each other, right? It's just meatbags. Even though I know on some level, essentially, we are. But we are so much more. Alright, I'm going to have to put an age restriction on this, but I'll catch you around. See you later.